Welcome everyone. My name is Ela Shivek. I'm a member of the Engineers Island West Region Committee. This webinar is a part of the Engineering National Development Series organized by the West Region. The series marked the recent publication of Engineers Island National Development Plan 2021-2030 and promote new ideas for engineering practices across all sectors aligned with the Project Island 2040 strategy. Under this session, we are delivering two events linked together and titled Transforming Our Water Supplies for Your Future. This evening's talk is part one, called Strategy and Planning. I'm delighted to have here today two excellent speakers from Irish Water, Miriam Grant and Des Joyce. Miriam works in the Water Asset Strategy function, while Des works in Water Asset Planning. Irish Water has recently published its first 25-year strategy for drinking water supplies in Ireland. There is a key focus on developing sustainable and resilient water supplies to meet growing demand across the country while safeguarding the environment. This presentation will provide an understanding of the development of this 25-year strategic plan and also look at how Irish Water will address immediate and critical needs across these water supplies over the next 5 to 10 years. Now, I would like to briefly introduce our speakers. Our first speaker this evening is Des Joyce. Des is a chartered civil engineer and a fellow of Engineers Island. Des is also a chartered member of the Institution of Water and Environmental Management and a member of the Institution of Civil Engineers. Des holds a Bachelor in Civil Engineering with Queen's University and a National Diploma in Water Engineering from Sligo IT. Des has over 30 years of experience within the water industry. He is currently the water supply lead for Irish Water's Asset Planning section. He has worked with Irish Water since its inception in 2014. Prior to this, he was the managing director of Blue Hills Consulting for over 30 years, and before that, he worked with a number of local authorities, consultants, and contractors. Des began his career in the UK with Yorkshire Water in 1989. His talk tonight is titled Investing in Our Water Infrastructure over the Next 10 Years, and he will set out how Irish Water plans to turn a long-term strategic water plan into a deliverable body of work. Our second speaker this evening, Miriam Grant, is a chartered civil engineer with Engineers Island, who has been working in the water sector since graduating in 2014. Miriam holds a Bachelor in Civil Engineering and a Master in Engineering Management, both from University College Dublin. Her experience has been in water operations and planning, and more recently, she has been involved in the preparation and programming of the National Water Resources Plan in Irish Water. The plan identifies how Irish Water will provide a sustainable, secure, and reliable water supply to customers, both for now and for the future, while safeguarding the environment. The consultation for the first of 4 regional plans is now complete, and today Miriam will outline the outcomes presented as part of this plan, which Irish Water will adopt over the coming months. The title of Miriam's presentation is The Development of Ireland's First 25-Year Strategic Plan for Water Supply. At the end of these two presentations, we will have a Q&A session. So please ask your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen and not in the chat box. So welcome again, and let's start. Des, would you like to share your presentation?
Okay, hopefully you can see my presentation there. Okay, good evening, everyone, and thanks for postponing your trip out into the garden for at least another hour. My name is Des Joyce. I work in the Water Asset Planning section of Irish Water, as Ella outlined, and I suppose really I'm interested in our planning around our water treatment assets. I'm mainly involved in the water supply above ground assets. So really transforming our water supplies. What I'd like to do is maybe take a look back at I suppose the last 8 years of Irish Water, what we've done to start that journey of transformation, and maybe to look ahead over the next numbers of years. So I'm just going to, before I suppose launch into this, I'd like to maybe just have a look back at the history of water asset planning in Ireland. So we know that in Belfast in the 1700s, we were using wooden water pipes, probably made from mahogany or some other hardwoods. Most of the early work to provide water supplies on the island of Ireland was initially done by wealthy private individuals. Some of the work then was taken on by the grand juries in the 1800s. And, you know, around the 1700s, some of the assets that you would have seen to emerge would have been these open reservoirs. So the likes of Belfast, Dublin and Waterford would have seen these open reservoirs or water basins, as they were called. And these were just great big depressions. It was dug in the middle of cities to collect the water. They were lined with puddle clay. This picture here is from a book, a really good book on industrial Ireland by Colin Wren, and it depicts one in James's Street in Dublin in 1728. So then you had the emergence of things like steam pumps, cast iron mains, and then an important date would be the Local Government Act of 1898 with the introduction of county councils. So the county councils gradually got involved in the provision of water and wastewater services, and remained doing so right up until recent times. So then in 2014, we had the creation of a new water utility, Irish Water, a new approach. You had 31 local authorities, the assets of 31 local authorities, I suppose, transferring the responsibility over to a new water utility. And from the water side of things, that meant us taking on responsibility for around 850 water treatment plants and about 63,000 kilometres of water mains. And that was no small task. You know, we inherited a huge asset base. When you put all the water and wastewater assets together, you're looking at probably, you know, 7,000 or 8,000 separate asset locations around the country. And one of the things I suppose we had to work hard at in the early days was the data around these assets. The data was very mixed and varied. Some assets had decent enough data, but the vast majority, the information around those assets was quite poor. In the first few years, I suppose we dealt with a lot of reactive problems. We had a lot of boil water notices, a lot of crypto outbreaks, and we spent a lot of time dealing with those. We had to build a lot of new relationships. We had a new working relationship with the local authorities. We had to develop new relationships with our new regulators, our economic regulator, the CRU, and also our environmental regulator, the EPA, alongside also the department. So the problem at the time was loads of specifications and standards. Every local authority had, I suppose, their own sets of specifications and standards. So we had to begin work to develop our own sets, and we had to benchmark off other water utilities and try and come up with their own sets of standards in that. Meanwhile, internally, we had to develop new governance processes to hand over and approve projects. And meanwhile, there was a lot of uncertainty about whether the utility would actually last. But one of the things I suppose we learned quite quickly was there was a need for a long-term vision. So from a water treatment point of view, the challenge was quite large. You know, the map on the left there shows you the location and the size of, you know, all the treatment plants in the country. You can see that, you know, we started with 850 water treatment plants. I think we've brought that down to about 717 over the last 8 years, but we still have an enormous amount of treatment plants. When you consider our neighbours, we'll say Scottish Water, similar population, similar kind of urban-rural split, they would have close to 300 water treatment plants. Northern Ireland Water up the road, 1.5 million people, they've got theirs down to 23 plants. So again, you know, we have a lot of assets, a lot of you know, sites to look after, a lot of risks to manage in that. So I suppose there was kind of three key things that we looked at. I suppose we had to get an understanding of these assets. It was years of underinvestment. We had to now get to grips with, you know, what was at these sites, what were the needs, what were the priorities, and what condition they were in. So we had to develop priorities, and we had to develop an approach then as to how we would deal with these priorities. I forgot to mention down the bottom corner there, that's what 63,000 kilometres of mains looks like when you put it on a map like that. So again, a lot of underground assets as well. So the challenge of understanding our water above ground assets, as I said, an enormous amount of assets, like where do you start? So we came up with a fairly, simple approach, really. We broke the water supply process down into about 8 barriers. So we took these barriers. So you have things like, primary disinfection, disinfection of the consumer's tap, ability to treat cryptosporidium, whether we have enough water at the various stages, etc. So we created these barriers, and then we measured these plants off these barriers to try and see which of them were failing at the various barriers. And when we did that, then we kind of risk rated the highest priority ones, and we set about then, I suppose, come up with ways of investing in and fixing these assets. As we've moved on over the recent years, we've moved our approach to a more risk-based approach. So going forward, we're moving more towards a drinking water safety plan approach. And this is a World Health Organization approved approach. And from January 2023, it will become regulated under the new drinking water regulations. And effectively, this is a farm to fork water approach, if you like. So ours is source to tap, and it's a kind of a deep audit approach, a detailed deep dive into the water supply risks that exist on a water supply. And then once you've identified those risks and the high risks, you can set about mitigating those risks and deciding whether we can change the way we operate these plants, or whether there's capital investment required to put in new assets or replace assets. So again, when we're investing in these assets, one of the things that jumps out, I suppose, is that, if you don't have a clear picture for where this asset is going to be in 20-25 years, it's difficult to know what level of investment you need to put into this asset. Like, is this water treatment plant going to be here for just 5 years, or is it going to be here for 50 or 100 years? So again, like that will influence the decision making around the level of investment at that plant. So there's a need for a long-term strategy, and that's something that we have been working on over the last numbers of years, and that's something that Miriam Grant will pick up in the following presentation following this. So again, better long-term strategy allows for better investment in their assets. Again, what are the key things we learned, I suppose? Well, I suppose the key 3 areas, I suppose, really are water quality, ensuring we have safe drinking water, ensuring we have enough water, at the various stages. So do we have enough water in our sources? Are our treatment plants able to treat enough water? Do we have enough storage, enough trunk mains, and can we deal with growth? And then we have to deal with sustainability, environmental and resilience, and deal with future proofing. So some of the challenges that we see around the corner, I suppose, are the new drinking water regulations. They're going to basically allow us to deal with new challenges. New parameters have to be monitored for. There's a higher level of monitoring required. Shortly as well, we expect to see some new legislation on restrictions. Excuse me. So this new abstraction legislation we expect as well, and that's the existing legislation is fairly old, and we expect this will challenge us in terms of the projects we have to bring forward in terms of developing new treatment plants, developing new water treatment plants. Excuse me. So again, we all have, no matter what job we're in at the moment, we all have the backdrop of the climate change crisis. So again, that's something that's becoming to the forefront in all our investment decisions. And again, Irish Water is a very large energy user in the state, and we have to look very carefully at how we can reduce that energy and reduce our carbon footprint associated with that. So I think I probably just want to introduce some of the key stakeholders within our business and just explain what they do. So I suppose I work within asset planning, and asset planning is within the asset management family within Irish Water. So in this family here, these are really the owner of the assets. They keep the data on the assets. They know the location of the assets, the condition of the assets, and the investment decisions on our assets come from this section. We work very closely then with our asset delivery colleagues, and again, asset delivery are responsible for capital investment to improve our assets and to do that safely. They're either looking at replacing assets or replacing assets or upgrading assets, delivering risk reduction, cost saving solutions, improving the water quality, and maybe improving the environment. And then the third key stakeholder I've mentioned here is just asset operations. And again, asset operations, they work very closely with our water services colleagues and local authorities to deliver safe water to consumers. We look at optimizing the plants and reducing the reducing operational cost. Again, they look to maintain the assets, and they work very closely with themselves in terms of identifying improvements and the needs of these plants. And again, they work very carefully to ensure regulatory requirements are met. So just to take a look at the asset management family where I am, I suppose there's kind of 5 key sections within here. Asset strategy, look at the long-term planning, and Miriam, who's going to speak after this, she works in the asset strategy. So they're looking at the long-term needs of the business. Asset planning, where I am based, we're very much focused on, I suppose, the 0 to 5 and maybe 0 to 10 year period. And we're looking at, I suppose, making the decisions, developing the scopes and handing over the projects that we need to deliver to deal with the issues and the risks that we have to deal with in the immediate future. We work closely as well with our asset investment colleagues, and they're basically involved in budget setting and interaction with the economic regulator and the department. Again, we're supported by asset intelligence and the data management, and also asset sustainability and innovation teams. One of the, I suppose, the big changes that came about when Irish Water came on the scene, I suppose, is we moved away from a kind of an annual funding of the water and wastewater needs in the country to a more multi-annual approach. So I suppose, in 2014, we began our first investment period, which is over 3 years. So these revenue control periods, or RCs as they're referred to, RC1 went from 2014 to 2016 and saw about 1.6 billion invested. RC2, 2017 to 2019, saw about 2 billion invested. And we're currently in the middle of RC3, which sees, we hope to see around 5.4 billion invested. So we're currently working on compiling our investment plans for RC4, and this will see, investment over the period 2025 to 2029. So again, we'd be hopeful of seeing an increase in the investment over this period. So I work in the water side of the business, and I suppose I'm interested in that side. So in terms of water investment over this period, you're looking at around 500 to 600 million per year, and that's kind of split between the above ground and the below ground assets. So again, we're moving towards, expect to spend around 300 million a year on our water supply above ground assets. About 40% of this is delivered through what we call national programs. 60% of this is delivered on larger one-off projects. So earlier I would have mentioned, our assessment of the various needs and the barriers in the plants. So what we came up with was a whole series of national programs that would target the major deficiencies in these programs. So down the right-hand side there, you can see the various programs that we hope to roll out, and many of them are rolled out over the next 5 to 10 years to deal with the various needs that we have. So again, things like, treated water storage, impounding reservoirs, filter upgrades, disinfection, all those are separate programs. And why we took this approach, I suppose, is that it's a faster approach. It allows us to bundle up, many needs of a similar nature. So then in terms of sitting down and workshopping those out with the various stakeholders who are involved with them, we're focused on one particular need. In terms of scoping and hand over those projects, they get handed over to maybe regional contractors who can focus on those particular areas. So again, it allows us to hit a wider number of risks quickly. So I just thought, just to kind of tie in with what Miriam's long-term strategies presentation put up afterwards, I just thought maybe I'd look at one particular area and give you some background on some of the work we've done here over the last number of years and how the long-term strategy is important to this. So in 2014, Letterkenny was one of the big challenges we faced. One of the largest towns in the country with a very poor water supply. So about 20,000 people supplied with a surface water source that just had, disinfection and filtration. So, very, very poor treatment, high risk, I suppose. There was no barrier against cryptosporidium. One of the first consumers downstream of the treatment plant was the regional hospital. So we set about, upgrading this plant. We provided a full treatment plant. We were conscious that there was a limit to how much water we could abstract from the source. So we had to interconnect Letterkenny with another treatment plant nearby that had capacity. But I suppose what we learned over that period, I suppose, was that within that red circle you see there around Letterkenny, there are probably about another 20 supplies that, we hadn't taken account of. And I suppose, there was a need really to have a long-term approach to know what we would do with these supplies over time. So that's really why the need for a long-term strategic planning is so important. So really nearing our first decade, I'm happy to say the water utility is well established. The structures and resourcing are very solid. We've good systems and governance in place. The multi-annual investment process is working well. It's providing confidence both within Irish Water and also to the various bodies outside who work with us to deliver the programme. And again, we're very close to having completed the development of a long-term strategy. So that's my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I'll take any questions after the second presentation.
Thank you, Des. That was a great presentation. Now we'll move on to our next speaker, Miriam. If you want to share your presentation, please.
Yeah, I should see it there.
Yeah, perfect.
Hey, thanks, Des, and thanks, Ella, for the introduction. So hi, everyone. My name is Miriam Grant, and I work in asset strategy in Irish Water. And I've been working on the development of the National Water Resources Plan for the last number of years now. And we're currently in the middle of our consultation on the Eastern and Midlands region, which is the first of 4 regions. So today, I'm really going to use that as the example to explain the process and present some of the outcomes. And then I'll give you an overview, I suppose, of our plan for 2022 and the publication of the remaining 3 regions. So just a quick introduction into what the National Water Resources Plan is. It is Irish Water's 25-year strategy to ensure safe, secure, sustainable and resilient water supplies for all of our customers. And there's a key focus on ensuring that we have enough water available to meet a growing demand over the next 25 years, but at the same time safeguarding the environment. So we need a strategy like this to ensure that we're aligning our plans in Irish Water with key EU and national policies. So for example, we account for the National Planning Framework, and we use the growth rate set out in that for our demand projections. And we also account for things like the Water Framework Directive, which will strongly influence what water bodies we're abstracting from and how much we're taking now and into the future. The plan allows us to, set out clear approach and targets for every scheme in the country. So we're designing every scheme to the same level of service. And it also allows us to be transparent in how we are prioritising investment in our drinking water supplies going forward. So it's just a look at where the plan sits within the business. You have our Water Services Strategic Plan here at Tier 1. We have a legal requirement to develop this out every 5 years. And that sets out the business objectives around ensuring safe and secure water, meeting customer expectations, protecting and enhancing the environment, supporting social and economic growth, and investing in our future. And out of this comes Tier 2 plans, and one of these is the National Water Resources Plan. And that really sets the framework for how we will achieve those business objectives. And then ultimately out of the strategic plan, we're feeding into the capital investment plan. So we're feeding projects into our 5-year regulated capital investment plan. So just a look at the structure for the National Water Resources Plan. Early last year, we went out for consultation on the framework, and that set out the need across all of our supplies nationally and the methodology we would use to develop out the plan. So that was adopted in April, and it allowed us to progress then with phase 2, which is the development of the plan for every scheme across the country. And we're delivering it in 4 regional plans over the course of 2022. So currently we're out for consultation on the Eastern and Midlands plan. The consultation has been extended to the 8th of April, so it's due to close in the next couple of weeks. So along with the plan, we're consulting on the strategic environmental assessment and the NWRP impact statement. The next plan to go out then will be the Southwest Plan, and we're hoping for a launch in May this year. The third plan then will be the Northwest Plan in September, and in December, we're hoping to go out with the Southeast Regional Plan. So I suppose for the rest of the presentation, I'll focus on the Eastern and Midlands plan to, I suppose, explain the process and, present the outcomes. So the Eastern and Midlands region is the largest of the 4 regions in terms of land area and population. And it covers, a wide range of counties here, stretches west of Limerick City, picks up high growth areas there in the Midlands like Mullingar, Athlone, across to Dublin, it picks up all of Meath, some of South Louth, Kildare, Wicklow and Carlow. We have about 46 surface water abstractions within the region, about 160 groundwater abstractions and over 200 water treatment plants. There's a huge amount of assets within the region that we're assessing as part of the plan. I suppose, how do we assess risk across the 134 supplies within the region? There's really 4 key things that we look at. The first there is the supply-demand balance. So on the supply side, we're either limited by the sustainable abstraction at the source or the sustainable operation of our treatment plant. And really the lesser of these gives you what we call our water available for use. And then on the demand side, we have accounted for water, which is growing over time in line with National Planning Framework projections, plus unaccounted for water, which is decreasing over time. So we have the business targets for leakage reduction built into the supply demand balance. And then we apply a headroom allowance, and that gives us our overall demand figure. So for the plan, we're designing on the difference between the two. So if there's a deficit, we're looking at ways to either increase supply, decrease demand, or a combination of the two. When we look at environmental sustainability, this is all about ensuring, sustainable sources for the future. In recent years, dry kind of periods in 2018, 2020, we would have experienced drought scenarios, and we would have had interventions where we've had to sandbag rivers to maintain levels of abstractions. We needed emergency boreholes, and we really need to be moving away from these practices and ensuring that we're developing sustainable sources today that can meet growing demand across the country. On the resilience side of things, we're designing for a 1 in 50 year level of service. So counterparts in Europe would be designing for maybe a 1 in 100 or even 1 in 200 year level of service. But looking at our existing asset base, that really seems appropriate now because it will require a huge amount of investment to even get to that level. And then on the quality side of things, over 50% of our water resource zones are at risk of being in deficit in terms of quality. But really we are systematically tackling prioritized areas through a number of different investment programs within Irish Water. So what does that actually look like then for the region? In terms of the supply demand balance, nearly 2/3 of our water resource zones are in deficit under normal conditions. So this means that we don't have absolute certainty that we can meet average day demand. And this is either down to a limitation in supply or the sustainable abstraction or the sustainable operation of our treatment plant. When we look at environmental sustainability, 20 of our 46 surface water abstractions within the region are potentially at risk of over abstraction or exceeding that sustainable abstraction limit that we've calculated in line with Water Framework Directive standards. On the resilience side of things, nearly 50% of our water resource zones aren't achieving that 1 in 50 year level of service. And this becomes much more critical then when you consider your dry year scenario or your drought scenario. And then on the quality side of things, a high number of our water treatment plants are at risk for one or more of the treatment barriers. This doesn't mean that we're not compliant. 99% of the time we're compliant with drinking water regulations, but it means there's risks that some of our treatment plants, so for instance, if there's a change in raw water quality and we don't have a process in place to, I suppose, tackle the issues there, there's a risk there that could occur at different treatment plants, or it could be something minor that we don't have an alarm in place. So again, we're tackling those issues on a prioritized basis. So when we take that need, how do we resolve it? And this is really the process for developing out the plan. So the first stage there is all around identifying the need. So for every water resource zone in the country, we've looked at the need in terms of quality, quantity, reliability, and sustainability. And the next step is really developing out a list of unconstrained options to address that need. We have a technical team, including an ecologist, hydrologist, hydrogeologist, and engineer that screen every single option. And that's screened on the basis of resilience, environmental acceptability, feasibility, and progressibility. At core screening, some of these options are screened out, and that's largely down to environmental reasons. So an option we're proposing, we could be proposing a volume above an allowable abstraction. And then we bring all of these options through a fine screening process. And this is really a multi-criteria analysis. So after that, we have scores for every option in terms of environmental acceptability, resilience, progressibility, and feasibility. Following the fine screening process, we're left with a feasible options list. So we have our in-house modeling team that take all of these options and they develop outlined designs, and then we bring those through a costing process. So they're in our investment planning system in Irish Water, and then we calculate out the net present value. So we have the CapEx, OpEx, environmental, social, and carbon costs associated with every feasible option. The final stage, we take our multi-criteria analysis, we have all of our costs for every option, and we carry out the approach appraisal. So we look at a range of different approaches, and ultimately we determine what is the preferred approach for every water resource zone. So we look to see, what is the best option in terms of cost, in terms of carbon, resilience, environmental score, and delivery. Ultimately, this plan, it will be continuously updated. Data is constantly being refined. If we're kind of ground proofing and something goes to project level investigation and it's deemed that that isn't feasible, we need to be feeding all of that information back into the start of this process to ensure what we're proposing here at the end is ultimately the best solution for every scheme in the country. So what did that options assessment actually look like for the Eastern and Midlands region? It says we identified about 1,140 unconstrained options to address all the needs within the Eastern and Midlands region. And you can see the range of options that we looked at here. It was mostly groundwater rationalizations and surface water options, but we also considered, effluent reuse, desalination, riverbank filtration reservoirs, and conjunctive use options with groundwater and surface water. Ultimately, when we brought all of these through the screening process, a large number of them were screened out and largely based on environmental reasons. And we were left with about 610 feasible options that were taken forward for costing. So at the approach appraisal stage, there's kind of 6 key things that we look at. So when we're looking to see what the preferred solution is for every scheme, we look at what is the least NPV cost. So what is the lowest CapEx, OpEx, environmental, social, and carbon cost? And the driver there is alignment with public spending code. We look at quickest delivery. So what can be designed and constructed in the shortest time to, address a critical risk. We look at best environmental. So as part of the plan, we're publishing the strategic environmental assessment. And the driver there is really, to find the lowest potential environmental impact. The best AA then looks at the lowest potential ecology impact to a European site, and the driver there is the Birds and Habitats Directive. We also look at the least carbon, so lowest embodied and whole life carbon cost. And we look at the most resilient, so key focus there on Water Framework Directive and what is resilient and sustainable in the long run. And as part of the approach appraisal, the first stage we look at is at a water resource zone locally, so a single supply. And at this stage, we're trying to see, is there an option locally that can address the need? So for example, if we have a single water resource zone, it might be determined that under all of the different approaches, developing out a groundwater solution is the best for a particular water resource zone. We then take it up a level to a study area. So we look at a kind of a wider combination of water resource zones. And at this stage, we're trying to assess if there's any larger group of options that might address the deficit with better outcomes. So for example, if we take that single water resource zone where we had the groundwater solution as the best local option, at study area level, there might be a better option delivering better outcomes that could look at rationalizing that scheme to maybe a supply with a surface water abstraction. And then ultimately, we're bringing it up to a regional level. So we're looking to see if there are any larger options like regional transfers that could resolve deficits across the study area and offer better alternatives. Ultimately, what you see here is a spider diagram of the results that came out for the Eastern and Midlands region. Combination 1 there is a regional approach with a large regional transfer. Combination 2 is a regional approach without a large regional transfer. And combination 3 again is a different combination without a large regional transfer. What you can see here, combination 1 scored the best in terms of least cost, although they all came in very, very close. It scored the best in terms of resilience, AA, and best environmental. It scored well in terms of delivery when compared with the other combinations. And it scored worse in terms of carbon, but they all scored relatively close. And I suppose that's something that you can look at further to make gains at project level as well. So ultimately, combination 1 came out as the preferred solution. So what does the preferred solution actually look like for the Eastern and Midlands region? I suppose a key focus for Irish Water now and into the future will be on reducing leakage. So at the end of 2021, we achieved targets to reduce leakage nationally to levels of about 38%. And as part of the plan, we're looking to reduce leakage further by 2033 to about 22% on average across the Eastern and Midlands region, and about 21% in your regional centres and cities. So it's an ambitious target to achieve about 140 megalitres a day leakage savings over the next 11 years, but it's a key part of the preferred approach. But ultimately, it is a twofold solution. And I suppose even with achieving targets like this, we do need to look at new supply options as well, so that we can ensure that we can meet growing demand and also, I suppose, reduce supplies where they're currently unsustainable. So as part of new supply options, as part of the preferred approach, we're proposing to decommission about 66 water treatment plants across the region. These are indicated by small black dots, so they're largely small localized supplies. We're proposing to upgrade about 136 water treatment plants. So on the diagram here, wherever you see an orange dot, that's where we're proposing to increase abstraction and upgrade a treatment plant or increase the capacity at the treatment plant. And where there's a blue dot is where we're maintaining the abstraction either at the current or a reduced level of abstraction. And we're proposing to upgrade treatment plant for water quality purposes only. As part of the plan, we're proposing 4 new water treatment plants. 3 of these are small plants for local kind of groundwater solutions, but one of them is a new surface water abstraction at the Partine Basin on the River Shannon. And that will really form part of a large regional solution across the Eastern and Midlands, which will interconnect about 50 of our water resource zones. I suppose a key benefit of delivering that solution is that all of our key towns and cities will be interconnected either by source or trunk main. And that allows us to be much more adaptable in our forward planning. And if there are any changes in demographics where we might see people moving out of cities into those regional centres, a plan like this allows us to be adaptable to changes like that. And ultimately it allows us to support non-domestic growth anywhere across the region. I suppose in terms of the preferred approach, we're looking at a transformation of our supplies. If you take, for example, our existing supplies in the Greater Dublin area, we have really, really good sources on the outskirts in Wicklow and Kildare. And historically, these have all been feeding inwards into the Greater Dublin area. And we can't use these, I suppose, to supply your high growth areas on the outskirts, like we have higher growth rates here in South Louth, East Meath, than we do in the Greater Dublin area. But ultimately, by developing out the new Shannon source, it allows us to supply, key growth areas in the Midlands. It allows us to supply into the Greater Dublin area and use these sources to supply outwards into those high growth areas like South Louth, East Meath, down into Carlow and Wicklow. And ultimately, you're developing a large new regional water resources zone that can support growth anywhere across the region. I suppose in terms of outcomes, by delivering, everything set out in the plan, we'll be providing, a 1 in 50 year level of service to every water resource zone. And this will obviously reduce outages and boil water notices across the region. 50 of our water resource zones will be interconnected. So that will be connecting about a population of about 2.2 million. And along with that, we'll be decommissioning about 66 of our water treatment plants. 100% of all key towns in all counties will be able to support non-domestic growth. 45% leakage reduction is the target to achieve, and this will result in better control of our networks to prevent new leaks. 95% of the population will be supplied from either impounding storage or natural aquifer storage. And options like this are much more resilient to climate change and drought in the future. And 50% of our unsustainable sources will be decommissioned, and the remainder of these then will be reviewed during the licensing regime. So looking at the plan for consultation over 2022, the Eastern Midlands plan was extended, and the consultation is due to close on the 8th of April. We're hoping to launch with the Southwest plan, which will cover Cork and Kerry. We're hoping to launch that on the 17th of May this year. We're hoping to launch then the Northwest plan in September and the Southeast plan in December. And following, I suppose, the consultation, we'll be reviewing all submissions and we be responding to these as part of the post-consultation report. And then we're hoping to start adopting the plans over the course of 2022. I suppose during the consultation, we met with statutory stakeholders, but we also held about 8 webinars for the general public. So went through a similar presentation as I did today, and it allowed people to present questions to the team as well, and hopefully that helped inform submissions. So really we're encouraging everyone to get involved in this process. We recognize that general public have really good informed views, particularly on their own environments and catchments, and we really need to be bringing that information back into our plan to ensure it's the most robust strategy that we have. I suppose just a little sneak peek at the Southwest plan going forward. We're hoping to launch this in May, so we have it drafted, and I suppose you're seeing kind of similar regional solutions as well for this area. As part of the preferred approach, we're looking to reduce the water resource zones here from about 174 down to 94, and you'll be looking to interconnect about 90 water resource zones. So some of the options here, look at a regional scheme there to rationalise Carsdeveen and Emlapashta to Waterville in Kerry, and looking at the Lough Crane source. We're also looking at potentially expanding out the Cork City water resource zone and rationalising about 21 of the smaller water resource zones on the outskirts into Cork City, and that will really focus on increasing at Inniscarra. We're looking at potentially developing out a new Lough Lane source as well for central regional supplying deficits in Killarney and across into mid-Kerry in the future. And also looking at new impoundment option here at Bantry to supply that area west, where we're currently constrained with our existing abstractions, abstracting from SACs. There's a lot of environmental constraints there as well. And then here in North Cork, we're looking at developing groundwater out in Mallow and Newmarket, and again rationalising smaller schemes into these larger groundwater areas. I suppose just to connect this back as well into Des's presentation there, as part of the Northwest plan that will launch later in the year, we're looking at Letterkenny, and we're currently working with Des and his team on developing out the plan for this area. In terms of the need for Letterkenny, Inishowen East and the Pollen Dam water resource zone, in terms of quality, quantity and sustainability, we have highlighted a high risk associated with all of these. And then when we look at the quantity, the deficit is huge there when you consider the high growth expected and the limitations on our existing supplies. So the deficit there that we're designing is about 17 megalitres a day. So when we looked at options, some of the feasible options there were to look at increasing Pollen Dam, but it would be restricted by, the amount that we could increase by. So looking at about 7 megalitres a day based on our calculations. We also looked at potentially developing out some new lake sources there, Garton Lough and Glen Lough, around Letterkenny. But again, they'd be limited to 9 and 14 megalitres a day. And then we looked at a new River Earn option as well, which is a lot further south, would require a lot of trunk main, but it could meet the full deficit. We also looked at multiple groundwater options within the region. Again, these would be quite small and localised to particular areas. And then we looked at other lakes where we could potentially increase our abstractions, or some new lakes that we could develop out, but these were screened out based on allowable abstraction limits set. And really, I suppose what is emerging and what we're working through now, is to look, I suppose, locally at, Pollen Dam, increasing our abstraction there and upgrading the treatment plant and improving interconnectivity there with Letterkenny. And this is probably to address, immediate need in the short, medium term. But long term, as Des was saying, you'll be looking at complex solution here, taking account of that existing source, but also potentially developing a Garten Lock and Glen Lock. And this will allow us to rationalise a lot of the schemes here on the outskirts, like Crease Lock, Carrigart Downings, where we currently have issues or will in terms of sustainability of the supplies. So that's just really a look at the work that we are doing for the other regions as well. So I'll pause it there and